All right. So today I will be talking about the field diagnosis and the management of canker disease. Those are common issues in almond orchards, usually characterized by abundant gumming on the trees. And so, yeah, what are canker disease? Canker disease are those diseases that cause, that kill wood generally. They cause wood discoloration, lots of gumming on the trees. They can lead to, the removal of these young infected orchards when the canker issues is widespread. But of all those cankers can be V-shapes, wedge shapes, or irregular. You may see dieback in the field, but again, recognizable by the lot of gumming on the tree. Through my talks, I'm going to share a lot of pictures here because I like to give you hints about a field diagnostic. It is possible to distinguish this disease in the field, so I will share pictures. And one of the reasons it's important to know what canker disease you're dealing with is because management depends first on accurate diagnostic, right? So when you see these sort of issues in the orchard, all this gumming, some of you may attribute that to Phytophthora, some of you may attribute that to band canker or Botrytis. Others may attribute it to ceratocystis. And so if you have the wrong diagnostic, you may get out there, apply some chemicals, apply fungicide, or apply something like Ridomil thinking it's Phytophthora. When if you not have an accurate diagnostic, then your management effort may be useless if you have the wrong diagnostic again. So over the past few years, we probably visited at least 150 orchards throughout the states, all counties. And based on these surveys and evaluation, what really come first in terms of canker issues in California almond is ceratocystis canker. And I'm going to get into more detail about each of these diseases. We also observe a lot of band canker in terms of importance. And then finally, we see aerial canker with Phytophthora that also seem to be on the rise. And then again, if you're in Sacramento Valley or let's say Modesto and North, you may deal with things like Eutypa lata, Eutypa dieback, and some Cytospora species. So when you look at all these individual diseases, especially from the side of management and research, it's important to understand that each of these diseases may be caused by a group of several pathogens. When we talk band canker, we have at least 12 species associated with band canker. When we talk Phytophthora, we have at least 3-4 species. So when we develop on the research side management strategies in the lab or in the field, it is important for us to work or identify products that will work against a broad diversity of pathogens. So the first, again, most widespread disease, you've all seen it. If an orchard has suffered shaker injury, ceratocystis canker will come in through the damaged bark tissue established on the tree and causing those gumming near the shaker damage and sort of this darker, almost water-soaked lesion, typical of ceratocystis, again, associated with the shaker injury. But when the disease is a little less misunderstood or overlooked, it's when it affects almond trees at pruning wounds. So these are illustrations of ceratocystis at pruning cut, also abundant gumming. But what's very unique about ceratocystis, again, as a tip for field diagnostic, you will see that gumming always occurs at the margin of the infection. All these gumballs are at the margin compared to Phytophthora, where gumball will be throughout the infected area. So the pathogen is ceratocystis destructans. We had very severe cases in past few years where you see all the red dots are an almond orchards with trees infected with ceratocystis canker. It seems to be very prevalent in this county here also precisely. We found it a lot at pruning cuts, and usually this pruning was done early in the season, like September to November. That's when we had very severe cases of ceratocystis at pruning cut. So the disease is very unique compared to all the other fungal diseases. It doesn't move with water or rain splashes, but it moves with insects. Drosophile flies, bark beetles, they move around to these fruiting bodies occurring at infected sites. They collect the spores and move these to fresh pruning cuts. In illustration here of an insect on the fresh pruning cuts. We just conducted a trial at Kearney a few weeks ago, and as soon as we prune, we see those bugs moving, probably to suck up some sap near pruning wounds, and those leads to infections. Another most prevalent disease is band canker. Band canker also is quite unique in the field, as it will affect mostly younger orchards, second, third, all the way to fifth leaf, but you won't see band canker in older mature orchards for some reason. And when band canker occur is at these growth cracks when trees are highly vigorous due to maybe the cultivar, the rootstock, or for having high input of water and nitrogen. When tree grow too quickly, cracks form on the trunk, and that's an infection site for band canker. So we form this gumbo along the circumference of the trees. Band canker also is very common if you have those micro sprinklers or any sprinkler irrigation system that wet the trunk. This will favor the disease to occur, so it's recommended to avoid that, or at least have splitters to avoid wetting the trunk. And also the disease may be quite alarming from the outside. You see a lot of gumbo. Usually inside it's just sort of a few necrotic tissues, and most trees will recover from band canker unless you're on a really extreme severe case. So growers may be very alarmed by band canker, but past fifth leaf, usually trees tend to recover and grow out of the canker. Again, band canker also, just like the other canker disease, can develop at pruning cut. In that case, that's where maybe the disease may be confused with others. But however, you see those typical V shapes where usually if you cut through the canker, you will see that the almond tree tend to contain that canker and grow around with time. U-type I canker. U-type I canker, you will find it from, I would say, Merced north. So very common. The more rain you may have, the more U-type canker you have. But Modesto, Merced, and North Sacramento Valley, that's where you will find U-type alata. Also very unique symptoms. The disease often is found where you have cracks, when trees have either poor scaffold selection or heavy crop load, where this crack will be forming at the tree crotch. That's our perfect infection sites for U-type alata. Cytospora, rare in almonds, but typical also in the field, as you will see this elongated canker initiating at pruning site, and this could be found anywhere from Fresno County to the Sacramento Valley. Cytospora canker is a common and really important pathogen of prunes. So if you're nearby plant prune orchards, that could be an issue, having Cytospora moving into your almond orchards. So field diagnostic, again, one of the points of my talk here. If you look at, Phytophthora also is a classic disease that will come a lot of gumming in the trees. But with Phytophthora, on the left side, you see that the gumming occurs throughout the infected area. Ceratocystis canker, next, you have the shaker injury or pruning wounds. The gumballs occur only at the margin of the infection. U-type I canker, again, typical, you will see that crack and just a few gumballs here and there. And then finally, band canker. It's on the trunk, you see cracks and gumballs that grows in the circumference of the tree. Infection court, how does this disease get into the trees? They basically need some form of wound, and so a lot of wounds are made for scaffold selection, primary and secondary scaffold selection. These leaves large pruning cut near the trunk, and so if these get infected, that's where usually you get in a lot of troubles, and infection moves into the trunk, and trees may be removed. Harvest. That's mostly for ceratocystis. When you have a shaker injury, only ceratocystis pathogen will make its way through the shaker damage. And finally, maintenance pruning. When you remove those lower limbs that are dead, when you try to clean up the orchards with time, open the rows to equipment passage, when you clean up those lower branches, that's another potential site for infection. So again, from this picture, you can see that all these diseases have one thing in common. They all initiate at pruning wounds. And remember, canker disease, once you have the gumming, it's usually too late. So that tells us into management, we're going to have to target our efforts towards pruning wound protection, right? You select your primary, secondary scaffold, you leave large wounds on the tree. That's when you want to come in and protect this pruning cut. It's well known also that any fungal pathogen moves around with rain and winds, so you want to avoid pruning around a rainy period. So, you know, a lot of this fungal fruiting structure for Eutypa botryosphaeria occur naturally on ornamental tree, on riparian trees. And so any trees around your orchard is likely to carry fruiting structures of bud, for example. So avoid pruning during the rain. And again, control here is mainly prevention. Once you have a canker, it's usually too late. So all your efforts are to target pruning wound protection. So that's our classic example of a heavy scaffold pruning, you know, pruning down to 3 or 4 scaffolds. These leave large cuts, and so you're going to want to protect these pruning cuts. So my lab, with research supported by the Almond Board of California, spent about 5 years and still up to now conducting field trials for pruning wound protections. We pretty much tested everything that was registered in almonds, every classic chemical fungicide. We also look at paint and pastes, and we look at biological control agents. I think this slide is a good summary. So again, here we prune, we apply the product, inoculate with the pathogen, and come a few months later to rate what product is working for pruning wound protections. Bottom line here is we have one great product, no doubt, is thiophanate methyl or Topsin M. We always are anywhere between 80, 90 to 100% pruning wound protection with thiophanate methyls. Then we have products with sort of a moderate activity, meaning that they work for some fungal species, but maybe not other. These might be Quit XLs and Rime. And then if you're not from these pictures, paint, which is used quite commonly by growers, paint didn't actually protect pruning wounds. So, you know, we tend to think that a paint on the top of a pruning cut will protect the wound, but based on our trial, this is not the case. Paint was not efficient enough. And then, interestingly, from this work also, we have a biological control. It's called a Trichoderma species. It's another fungal biocontrol agent which is able to colonize the pruning cuts and then compete, and it's also a mycoparasite, but compete in that pruning wounds against the canker pathogen and also allow up to 80, 90, 100% disease control. So these are quick illustrations, but you see the effect of Topsin on the pruning cut when it's applied. The canker do not develop after Topsin applications on the pruning cut compared to a non-treated control. Trichoderma, again, move inside the wood, so it's a very interesting biocontrol agent because it can colonize, the wood can colonize within the pruning cut and the branch and sort of compete against any canker pathogens. So that I've mentioned that, but a few other trials where, again, this Trichoderma product, the name is Vintech. If you had a spreader sticker, in our case we used New Film P, we had even an improved effect of the biocontrol agent with a spreader sticker such as New Film P. We had more funded research by both CDFA and CDPR. We tested a whole range of Trichoderma biocontrol agents. And this work again showed that these biocontrol agents are really good at protecting pruning wounds. Some are already registered in almonds. Root Shield is an example, Root Shield Plus. And if you look at these various products over the years of our trials, they again provide decent protection of pruning cut. Same with more work funded by DPR, looking at aggressive pathogens like Neophysicoccum parvum. You see that these Trichoderma or even Clonostichis type biocontrol agents are actually great at protecting pruning wound. And one reason for that is, again, they can just colonize. They are adapted to grow inside the wood and establish there, whereas a chemical will just stay on the surface of a pruning cut and be effective for about 2 weeks. So how to apply those chemicals, right? Ideally, growers want to have an easy sort of way, use these conventional sprayers, put Topsin or put a biocontrol agents and go through the orchard and spray. However, what really matters here is coverage. And again, if you're going to use a biocontrol agent, keep in mind that if you use that same sprayer that you use for a fungicide spray, you may have residue. So it will be very important to have a thorough washing of your sprayer, so there's no cross-contamination when you're going to use the biocontrol agents. But we looked at different things from conventional sprayer to this portable applied backpack. You know, depending on your area, it's realistic actually to have this small backpack sprayer and only target those pruning cuts. You only have so few pruning cuts on your tree, you don't need to spray the entire tree. So in that case, no drift, but a targeted applications into those pruning cuts. So in recent year, we evaluated, you know, more sort of a conventional commercial sprayers with what we had at Kearney, but the idea was to do our pruning cut, come with the sprayer, test different volume, and see if those were efficient for both something like Topsin or the biocontrol agents. So what we see is that at 100 gallons per acre, we were able to control the disease. It was not the perfect control. We were able to lower disease incidence, but you could see even with Topsin, we still had up to 50% disease incidence. So what that tells us is probably we need to work with larger volumes. Now we're testing 200 gallons per acre to make sure that this pruning cut get wet with the fungicide. Work from Themis on band Canker. What Themis came up was actually to spray those trunks also directly in March when the trees start to push and grow with Topsin as well to reduce infection from band Canker. And he saw from his work a significant reduction in band Canker incidence just by spraying the trunk before the disease actually shows up. Rime, there's been a lot of talk and discussion here in the valley about the efficacy of Rime applied as a drench product. So we took the sort of the claim from the company here and tested ourselves at the Kearney Ag Station. We drench Rime at 7 ounces per acre at the base of the tree, inoculated trees with a canker pathogen, and look if that had an effect on the reduction of canker length. And again, remember, we're using that in that case, often case, you know, what if I have an already ongoing infection? Could I slow down the infection using Rime flutriafol? So we had actually 1 year of data, so it's not, you know, I won't yet validate this data because we will want to have multiple years of research, but in this one trial, we saw actually a good efficacy for Rime applied through drench in reducing canker length with an ongoing infection with Ceratocystis canker. So interesting data. You drench the product, again, you have no drift, it's coming through your drip or through your drip irrigation system, but this 2 to 4 applications starting at the beginning of the growing season allowed us to see a reduction in canker length. So it's not a curative product, but it can slow down ongoing infections. Finally, we looked at pruning wound susceptibility over time, you know, pruning wound susceptibility according to the month of pruning. What if I prune in September? What if I prune in January, December, and so on? What is the most susceptible month to infection? And also we question what is the duration of a pruning cut susceptibility to an infection by canker pathogens. Bottom line is when you have a pruning cut, this pruning cut is going to be about susceptible for about 2 weeks. So if you spray one time right after pruning with a product such as Topsin, which is going to be effective for 2 weeks, you sort of cover that window of susceptibility of your trees, right? Again, we looked at the different months of pruning. We saw that trees pruning cuts were even healing faster if you prune later in January. So if you prune in December, it will take 2 weeks for a pruning cut to heal. If you prune in January, within 1 week, the pruning cut was healed. But again, remember, you don't want to prune when there is a period of rain, right? Scaffold selection, very important. Avoid cracks formation, so select scaffold that are spaced out on the trunk. Silverleaf wood decay. When I got called about silverleaf, it's usually Stanislaus County. I believe we are in Stanislaus County, right? So I put a few words on silverleaf. We had very severe cases all the time. It seems to be around Gustin area. But the way you recognize silverleaf, it's also a wood decay canker pathogen, discolorations inside the trunk. But the leaves of the infected trees are much pale in color. You see the left side pictures of these leaves compared to healthy leaves. And this is really fast growing canker disease. You will have an infection on these third leaf trees that you will see from the below the bud union all the way up into the scaffold branches within 2 years of growth of the trees in the field. Control, Jim Adaskavich also showed that trichoderma were a great product for that, so that sort of correlate with our research as well as rallying. Finally, a few words on Phytophthora. Phytophthora, we do tend to see it more in orchard. It's an aerial canker. Again, you can see the gumming occurring throughout the infection area. Several species may be involved, but infection typically initiate at the tree crotch. When all the scaffold branches come together, you have a water pocket forming here, and these are perfect sites for Phytophthora infections. A few words on the pruning wound canker caused by Phytophthora. This year we had a month of January with heavy rain. We call that atmospheric river. You heard that terminology a lot. So if you have prune around this atmospheric river, month of January, winter, what you may get into is issues such as pruning wound canker caused by Phytophthora syringae. In that case, the fungus grows very quickly and can kill entire scaffold within the summer. So what you do when you have a Phytophthora infection, I'll get into that, but quickly you see Phytophthora also when you have poor planting. If you have your bud union buried under the soil line, that's where Phytophthora reside, and so you can have an infection making its way up the trunk and killing tree really rapidly. But for management of Phytophthora canker in general, what we got good words from phosphites products in general. We have good return from growers or anyone who has tried. There's new product that coming in the market also from the work of Jim Adaskavich. Orondis was recently registered. They're also systemic, and you're aware also of product like Ridomil. Gold. These products are best applied when the trees are fully developed in April or so. When trees are fully developed, you can do a foliar application, for example, of the phosphites. The other products will have to be drenched. And finally, to conclude, sometimes people may get confused when you have herbicide injuries, such as this one called by glufosinate, right? Glufosinate, if you look at first sight, you may think you may be dealing with a band canker here, but these are herbicide burn when the cotton are removed and the herbicide is applied quickly after cotton are removed. The bark is not yet sort of rough enough, and so you may get herbicide injury when you get glufosinate. Foamy canker, very alarming. You may have seen that. Probably just a secondary reaction of a Phytophthora infection. And then finally, I'd like to thank everyone, Almond Board for funding, CDFA and CDPR for supporting some of this research. Thanks.
Okay, so my name is Brian Dugo. I'm a PCA with Mid-Valley Ag. I work in this general area, Modesto, Oakdale, Escalon, Ripon. Me being here, first of all, is kind of like Josh Johnson. Josh Johnson was the fourth-string quarterback that came in and for the 49ers in the playoffs, and so I am not a canker expert. I have 20 years experience, plus experience in this area, and you know, being a PCA, you work with the grower on a complete package, right? Nutrition, irrigation, all sorts of disease control. So this is one aspect of it, and I'm going to go through an example just this last fall with a grower. But you know, growers are faced with a lot of decisions to make. So I'm not going to come up here and preach about what chemical treatment you need to do or what needs to be done on every orchard, because you have to acknowledge that they're all different, areas are different, circumstances are different, and I think it's really important that we grasp the cultural practices that we need to incorporate into our growing practices to try to limit the exposure that we have. So start off the diagnostic part of it. What I do when I go to a field that I see an issue, some of these cankers have crossovers, but you examine points of infections, lengths of cankers, lengths of the infection points, the shape of the property of the canker, examine where they're at as far as pruning wounds, going past the rootstock into the scion. As a grower, contact your PCA. As a PCA, I use my UC Farm Advisors quite a bit. This is where I give my little shout out to Brent Holtz, which I draw on quite a bit, San Joaquin County, and Roger Duncan. And these guys do a phenomenal job just bringing research to me as a PCA, you guys as growers, from pruning trials to varietal trials. So excellent, excellent work. So what I did was I took Brent to an orchard. The situation I was faced with was pretty severe band canker. This is a nonpareil Carmel planting. The majority of the band canker was in the nonpareils, as it typically goes. There was a walnut orchard that was very close proximity, and I started working with this orchard in about the third leaf, so there was already infections there. And I told him, last year was the third leaf, I said, we got this under control. We're going to use some Topsin in the spring. He went out there, sprayed trunks on all the nonpareils, and then of course any of the infected Carmels because it was so severe. I told Brent, I said, I want to go through the orchard with this guy in the fall. We're going to try to pick out trees that are too far gone. We're coming at the age that the tree should be tolerant from new infections. At year 4 or 5, you're past. You should be past any new infections. So I said, I want to come out and assess it with the guy. So Flo showed some pictures of the narrow bands that come with band canker, how deep they go. Usually the tree recovers from it, right? That was what I was always taught. So there's going to be some trees that were too far gone, but what Brent actually walked out in the field with me, which was great, left his pickup, which was great. Brent brought a tool. He brought a chainsaw out, and what we did was we took some cross sections of these trunks. But what I expected to see was recovery in my cambium layers, as you see at the bottom half of the trunk of the tree. But this tree has 50% of its cambium layer gone, and there wasn't really indicators of that on the outside. So this was kind of a marginal tree, and when we saw gumballs on some of the other trees, you have 70-80% losses of the cambium layer. These are trees that are not going to recover. It's difficult to just peg band cankers and something. It's just something you're going to get past. There was severe losses in this orchard to this disease. So I was a little bit disappointed, number one, in my Topsin treatments, but you have to take all this into consideration. So I'm not picking on Flo, but his presentation had this slide, and he actually prefaced it, which was great. In my side, I've never had a sales rep come in and say, man, my product just doesn't work and the competitors is better. You know, you look at charts and there's their product is always the best treatment. So in this scenario, we have our untreated on the far left, and you can see trichoderma, which is what Flo's trying to work with to try to get registered and or get some traction, and you have Topsin over there on the far right. So what I mainly want to point out to you with this slide is we still have a 25% infection rate, correct? I had trees that were too far gone in my band canker scenario. I would encourage you guys to not be discouraged by trying the treatments that these guys are recommending, that I recommend doing, and then when you still see symptoms in the orchard that it didn't work. Thankfully, the guy still kept me as his PCA, but I'm confident that we would have had a lot more band canker in that orchard had we not done the Topsin treatments. So I would just encourage growers, PCAs, to be experimental, keep your minds open, and try these treatments. I'm excited about trichoderma. Most of the time, guys, when we're dealing with any of the cankers that Flo has pointed out, it's prevention. It's not game, set, match when you see gumballs on a tree, but most of the time when you're looking back on some of the decisions that you made, there was points of infection or poor weather incidences, scenarios that caused your infection. We'll just say that. So before you plant an orchard, I would consider proximities to river, to walnut orchards. Those have a tremendously high load of Botrosphaeria that can blow into orchards. The reason I kind of put ground prep, irrigation design, water source, rootstock selection, irrigation scheduling, and fertility, some of the best orchards I see, it's all about keeping the tree healthier. So your tree has natural responses to ward off pathogens. So encourage everybody to do a good job with their rootstock selections and keeping your trees healthy. The next decisions are probably the most important. So what you do once you have your orchard in, you have your most vulnerable times in those first couple years of pruning. And those are the most severe infections that you're going to get in the life of that tree. Make your decision to open up your scaffolds at a time that you look at the forecast and don't expose those wounds to rain, if at all possible, right? It's not a perfect world. One big issue I see this industry coming into is a lot of our pruning is mechanical. A lot of our passes through the orchard now, we have a rake that can windrow the brush for us, so we're going to hedge an orchard, windrow it, shred it. All that happens faster than 2 weeks. It can. So we're going to blow all these spores up into the fresh cuts. Flo pointed out that you have about a 2-week healing process. Also, January is a much better time to prune. So what's going to happen with those immediate post-harvest hedge jobs, windrow them and shred them, and you're blowing all that inoculum into the tree. And then one real important timing, I think, is your shake timing on a young orchard and exposing that tree to wounds. So all of these spores are always floating around. Be cognizant, be aware of the times that you're opening your tree up to disease. Now, Flo covered all of that. I just wanted to relate it on a PCA side, grower side to you. I'm going to touch real quick on the chemical treatments that I utilize, and it's pretty much everything that Flo pointed out. Ridamil orandus has been a very wet winter, and so we shall see how our roots survive being saturated. Topsin, I think, is an excellent fungicide for band canker, pruning wounds. Rime has been, it had some MRL issues. It is very systemic within the tree. I think that they've got all those worked out, but as far as starting a young tree off, and the data is showing it to prevent against these wood cankers is tremendous. Don't expect 100% control ever, right? But it's good. And then I base a lot of my canker control, Phytophthora control, phosphites. We look at those top ones. Topsin isn't very expensive, but we think of a Phytophthora program with your chemicals, Ridamil or Orandus. You get $100 an acre out there pretty easily. The bottom one, a phosphite application with K-Phyte or System K for disease, is very effective and inexpensive, and most of the time you can find a timing that you can piggyback that in. Those products, when they're in the tissue, prevent infection. So I would highly recommend that if you take anything from me today, that you keep that phosphite in your tree's tissue. So it's lunchtime, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, but are we supposed to open it up to any questions for Flo or I?
So this gentleman is asking if is it best basically to prune when the trees are already leafing out, right? Pushing, yeah. And so you get this recommendation from UC? Old timers, okay. And these were for almonds. Okay. Yeah, so, in grapes, for example, also, I think that's when some of this work initiated, when we had late pruning and when the trees start to reactivate and eventually, sap, or in vine you will talk about bleeding, right, when you make those cuts. Late pruning in general has been known to be less susceptible, and many reasons for that is, again, trees start to reactivate, and you will see from our data, late January prunings, those wounds heal very, very fast. But in the same time as the tree itself, maybe heal faster, there's also, the microorganism life in orchard also starts to activate, and it's more likely also that you may have natural trichoderma or natural bacteria also colonizing these wounds with late pruning and warmer temperatures. So it's a general trend validated by research oftentimes in multiple crops that late prunings help reduce pruning wound susceptibility.
A lot of the old-timer talk, too, I think it was around bacterial canker blast infections. And so I completely agree with Flo. When you get the sap flowing up, you have a quicker healing time on that wound.
Okay. The general approach, like any of this management, is always best preventive, right? So once you think of once you see a cankers, and you've seen pictures from Brian right now with all this big discoloration, it's usually too late, right? I think now at Davis they're looking at when you have a Ganoderma infection, can trichoderma actually sort of help fasten the degradation of a conch or something? So there's other angle to look at trichoderma. But again, best approach is always preventive. You want the trichoderma to be established. We also actually compare, what if I have a 1 week time before Botrytis comes in. Once you allow 1 week for trichoderma to establish, the product even work better, right, compared to 24 hours. So all of these are preventive best approach. It's once you have a canker, it's generally too late.
I'd also like to add that the Canker scenario, I think that we prevented some new infections in that orchard. I was just dealing with a lot of old infections where I lost a significant amount of cambium, but yeah, you look back, you have decisions that probably should have been made, but even if you're dealing with it, you can prevent new infections within the orchard.
And that was Topsin? Topsin? Yeah. I personally did not get the opportunity to do this sort of sampling in almonds, but I work also a lot of cherries. And in cherry, we've seen a lot of infected planting materials with infection coming at this, what do you call it, snap cut, or this cut, this topping of the rootstock after budding. Basically, you have the rootstock portion of the tree. You have the bud and growing into a scion, and oftentimes and generally these top portions of the rootstock is cut, and these pruning wounds can be site of infection, especially if the trees or the nurseries are grown outside through the winter, right? But in almond, I haven't verified that this is the case.
I was thinking about my past canker treatments prior to about 10, 15 years ago. A guy would plant tree, and my prevention program was pretty much nothing, and rarely saw canker. And now, in the last 10 years, it's become very severe. They've also identified a lot of different Botrytis within that. So I think something has changed, and there probably is something to look at that level.
Well, with that, I wanted to thank both of you. And lunch is there, and come back at 1:15. We have 3 more sessions to continue the conversation. Appreciate all the questions we've gotten, and thanks to Flo and Brian, and also to all the previous speakers.